Hi, Nikolai. Welcome to the Speak as a Leader podcast. I am thrilled to be talking to you. We've been talking back and forth about different things. 15 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking because we would have been mortal enemies as you're at Unilever and I would have been at Procter& and Gamble. But I'm so glad that's not the case anymore for me. So we can talk about everything we like. And I am so excited to be having this conversation.
Likewise, and I'm glad that we're doing it on friendly terms as opposed to combative profit and loss, efficiency, revenue target kind of discussion. So that's great.
Yeah, that's always better. Always so much better. So, would you like to tell us a little bit about your personal and professional journey so far? I know you've had an incredibly interesting journey and you're still on it. You have a very adventurous take on life. So, I want to know a little bit about that.
For sure. So let's see. I'm Nikolai. I'm I want to say a human of immigrants or a child of immigrants. Immigrated to Canada in 2001 with the goal to have a better life than my parents had back home. I graduated in the field of supply chain operations and spent my field kind of 50-50 in the aerospace and defense sector, or what we would refer to as electronics manufacturing and consumer goods. And I've done quite a wide variety of jobs: planning, buying, inventory, moving factories, implementing ERP systems. And I'm doing forecasting, or fortune telling, as I like to call it, with just sophisticated Excel spreadsheets and stuff. So, yeah, it's been a very interesting and rewarding journey. And every time I take on a new role, I realize just how much I don't know, which is a great grounding moment that I think all of us need to go through our careers so that we can be the best version of ourselves.
That's a very wise thing to say, that it's about taking on challenge after challenge so that you can eventually discover, find, and refine the best version of yourself. And you've been a leader in the professional sense for a little while now. I want to know a little bit about that. Did you ever have a flip switch moment where you understood or you had this kind of light bulb realization that, oh, wow, I'm no longer just an employee. I'm no longer just a manager or just a boss. I've become a leader. This is weird.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career with a 18-month paid internship, which is something I recommend to everyone because it kind of gets you a try before you buy sort of thing. So you get to try the career that you're potentially going to do for the rest of your life without the repercussions of, paying for a piece of paper that may not serve you very well. And I had a wonderful boss who I was really afraid of because it was my first real job, who gave me a ton of responsibility. And I remember one time I told him, I'm really busy with all this work. I don't want to go to this. We have a quarterly event to celebrate all of the continuous improvement projects and to celebrate people's hard work, particularly on the manufacturing floor. I said, listen, I really got to get this done. Like, I'm not going to come. And he said, you're going to be a future leader, and you already are. And you need to make sure that you're there for other people to celebrate, because leading is not just about, saying fancy words. It's kind of just being there and people feel your presence. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily say anything, but that you just have to be there for people because they really, really appreciate that. And I just it helped me realize that, like, being a leader is not really about me, it's about other people. You have to be willing to kind of give a piece of yourself so that you can bring the best in people, right? So you can't really pick and choose that. You're either all in or not in at all. So that was really kind of a flip switch moment. And he also ingrained into my brain that this is someone I'm going to be in the future, and he's going to make sure that he's going to help me unlock that. So it's not something you'll learn in school. That's for sure.
I love that. I love that you're either all in or you're not in at all. And you can probably see why a lot of leaders fail when they're not all in. And I can clearly see the difference if I look back at my career and I look back at the people that I've worked with, the ones that have been in it for themselves, for their own glory, for their own objectives in their job, they're in the company, they're the ones who have ultimately not been inspiring. They're the ones who haven't really succeeded at creating a great team culture and ultimately shooting themselves in the foot, because if they don't have a good team that really wants to work for them, they just have a workforce that they're activating from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't robots. They don't just work because they need to work. They work because they want to work for someone. And that is
Mm-hmm.
really very important. Would you
Mm-hmm.
say that you bring in a very special Nikolai personality into work?
Yes, I most definitely try to, and I do that by being as informal as I can. And the reason for that is that I want people to know me for who I am first. So, if I am not a morning person, I want people to know that I'm not a morning person, as opposed to just faking it every time, because then people will just um, really not trust you or build a good rapport with you. So it's good to be upfront with people and tell them, you know, to an extent, you shouldn't be telling them kind of every single detail about your personality, because we're all growing and evolving and learning, and I think more importantly, unlearning certain behaviors. But I try to be as authentic as I can be, so people know that I am, a little bit of a deep thinker. They know that I enjoy, the finer things in life, such as art and cheese and beer, and like talking about history and economics and psychology. So I try to bring that into every conversation, not to appear this kind of sage, wise person, but just because that's who I am. And it took me a long time to do that, because I always thought that in business you have to be kind of this suit and tie, professional, kind of use the jargon. And I noticed that doesn't really get you far beyond the superficial relationship with people. And if you really want to lead, you have to earn trust. And earning trust is talking about non-work related stuff. And also people testing you, that if they told you something in confidence, you are not going to, tell it to somebody else. So that's been tough. And, I had to also learn as I got older that, like, okay, maybe people don't want to hear like this stuff. So like chill out on like this particular topic, and like go more that's more interconnected with the business side of things. And that's fine as well, because you have to, you know, depending on the time of day and the day of the week as well, like right now, is the Tuesday is the new Monday, right? And Thursday is the new Friday, based on how COVID and remote working happens. So you have to kind of take these things into account before you hit people with a ton of information that they may not be ready to absorb, so to speak.
I find that link that you made between showing your personality, showing up as your true self, and actually making an effort to express your own opinions and creating that trust. And that is so important. I coach people on how to express themselves better in public. And the one thing that I see consistently is a lot of people just jump into their presentations, or they jump into their subject matter without really taking the time to establish that trust through building that personal connection. I mean, there are countless examples of presentations where they just start. They're like, okay, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm just going to begin. But they don't understand that the audience is asking, okay, but why should I pay attention to you? Who are you? What do
Mm-hmm.
you represent? What experience are you bringing? How am I going to connect with you? And the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you're bringing in parts of your personality into your work and showing people that this is who you are, you're also sending a very positive signal to them and telling them it's okay for them to show themselves to you as well and to the rest of the team. So you're actually creating the precedent for this really positive, inclusive culture, which I'm sure the team appreciates.
Yes, yes, I most certainly try. I mean, the one thing I had to work over the years is my poker face, as they call it in the business world. When I am unhappy about something, it will be visible by my poker face. And what I needed convincing from a scientific perspective is that we have mirror neurons that essentially, allow you to, like, other people will pick up on your mood without you even saying anything, and you can kind of change the vibe of the room just by how you are feeling at that particular moment. And of course, you can get it right every day because we're all human, but just being aware that that happens is super important because you should feel responsible for the energy that you're bringing into a space and be very careful about what you're bringing in because you may just derail everyone's day and forget about productivity. You might make something a lot worse or exacerbate an existing problem, right? So
Absolutely. And as a leader, as a person who is in a position of power, you control the vibe in every room you walk into where you are the senior most person. It just happens and doesn't even matter which part of the world you're in. I thought for the longest time that, oh, I'm from an Asian culture or I'm working in Asia and here they take leadership very, very seriously and cultures are hierarchical. No, man, it's just like that in the US, in American companies, in European countries. Of course, the levels of hierarchy, the extent to which the levels are expressed is different. Here, it's extremely out in the open. The boss is always right. The boss will take the final call. And in some cases, they're more subtle, but it's always there. So it's your responsibility as the leader to set the vibe in every single room. And if you miss the mark, if you just create this culture of stress or mistrust, then you have set that vibe and it's going to be very difficult for anyone else to actually counter that.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you mentioned leaders and bosses, and I think, at least in my mind, there is a distinction between the two. It may appear small, but I think small things really make a big result, right? So I think with you work for bosses and you work with leaders, and just that change in wording is super important because with a boss you feel like you're more transactional in nature. You're kind of in this box that if you step outside of, you may get reprimanded because you're kind of going outside your comfort zone. But with the leader, they let you go into the path and they support you, right? With the example that I gave with my manager when I first started, there was a bunch of KPIs and he said, my name is on these, but it's actually your name. And no matter what happens, I'll make sure that you get the support, even if it doesn't work out, but you need to make sure that you see how it's all connected. Like sometimes things don't work out the way you want them to do, and you need to be able to answer the questions that come with it. And the sooner you start doing that and practicing, the easier you're going to have later, as opposed to you get promoted, to a manager in your 30s and you've never dealt with any conflict or problem solving or strategy, even for that matter, and you just kind of collapse because there's no training manual for that. You just have to do it and kind of fail forward, as he used to say. But you always need to have that support network, that the person that is there for you is not going to basically say, yeah, it's his fault. Quite the opposite. They're going to take the fall for you. But you have to appreciate that little relationship and make sure that you learn and kind of build on that. So to me, that's something that I don't think I'll ever forget, and I'm truly and deeply thankful for that experience.
That sounds like a great leader, really giving you the opportunity to shine, but at the same time giving you a safety net and saying that if we do well, you're going to take the credit. If we do badly, don't worry about it. I'm going to take the fall. I'm going to protect you. And it sounds like this is exactly what a young manager or a young employee would need early on in their career so that they can remember it like you do and then pass it on and create that culture of it's us and not me. And I often think about what bosses say and what leaders say because your mindset is what manifests itself through the communication tools and the methods that you use to express yourself. And a boss would say things like, get this to me by Monday, get this done. And a leader would say, what support do you need from me to get this done by Monday? How are you feeling about getting this done by Monday? Do you feel like we need to renegotiate these timelines? Do you think we need to do something that would help you get back on track? I'm interested in knowing, because I feel that right now you're in a great position and I hear the leader talking through you. And I'm sure that's probably wasn't the case when you first started out, when you first had responsibilities and you first got a team. Do you remember times where now looking back, you feel like, oh, I was a bad boss or I wasn't quite a leader at that point?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I'm it more than likely still happens because we're all human. But when I first became a supply chain team leader, which was very bittersweet because it's something that I um, never thought I would do like so fast after like having the internship and working there for a couple of years. I kept the mentality that I have to keep my individual contribution um, kind of mindset and also marry that with the leadership mindset and getting other people to do it. The issue here is that if you try to do both, you won't have time and you'll probably half-ass both things, right? So you have to find a way to let go. And I think that's something that people underestimate, and especially someone that likes to kind of make sure that things are done right or that things done a particular way, that you have to let other people try, make mistakes, and not get too hung up on the mistakes because you made them as well when you took on the task. But as a leader, you need to get people exposed to some of the things you're doing so that they can be leaders. Because if you're just going to have them do the same job, you're not really building a pipeline for the future. So in the beginning, for the first couple of months, I really like on top of all these reports. I had a very tough customer. I wanted to make sure that I make a really good first impression, but I wasn't like involving my team and like, we want to do this event to improve like on-time delivery. I'm going to put everything together. You guys just have to like give me the information. Probably would be a little bit better to say, hey, you take this portion of it, you take that portion of it, and explain to people that this is going to help you develop skill sets for the future to work with a customer in a more strategic way, help with negotiation. But I just thought about me. I need to make a good first impression. And that's something, again, that you need to work through at the end of the day, just letting go and letting people do it. And if they stumble, that's your way to actually back up what you've been telling them. Because it's very hard in practice, when things don't work out and you have to make up the difference sometimes. You want to blame somebody, but there's no one to blame. It's just life. So, yeah, that's the example I can think of, but there's many examples.
That's a great one. I think that the fear of getting things wrong is always on the mind of a young manager or a new boss or even a new entrepreneur who's just hired a team. That was certainly my case when I was in filmmaking and I was directing and producing, and I had my own little startup and I had a new team. And my biggest concern was that we need to get these projects right. We cannot disappoint our clients. And I realized later on that I was getting in the way of how much my team could learn. Because, like you, I was trying to do a lot of things myself, or I was trying to just give them these very specific junior level roles and not really letting them contribute to the process. And people feel it. They understand when you don't trust them enough to actually do the work that will be meaningful in some way, and you're just delegating the smaller or the more insignificant parts of the work to them, and you're basically giving them a signal that I trust me before I trust you. There's
Yes, yes,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
that can't get you far. Like you said, you're just having them, like, you're just putting them in these boxes and they're never going to emerge out of them. That's definitely not what you want when you're in a company and you want to get promoted, and the only way for you to get promoted is if your team members are capable enough to take your job, and if no one is capable enough, then you're also stuck. So it definitely creates that vicious cycle.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And even if I could use a kind of a communication segue a little bit into this, with COVID, kind of things happen overnight with people working remotely. And our company has already been doing it remote uh, once or twice a week. So we had the tools, technology, and processes in place. But when it was done like full time, I, the way I did it every week with my team is that I said, this is the important things to do because we work off a special calendar. You want to make sure that you keep organized. And then after like 6 months or a year of that, I'm like, why am I dictating what should be done? Why don't I just ask them what should be done? And then like fill in the gaps and explain why. Because I'm basically spoon feeding and babysitting a bunch of adults who are then relying on me to provide these like emails to say this is important, not important. And that was a huge unlock for me, and something so simple, but like now I'm just asking like, okay, what is the priorities, and then just kind of tweak them, and then people feel empowered to actually kind of do it at their own as opposed to following steps A through Z, right? So it's just like, just asking people like, hey, what do you think of this? What if we do it this way? And we try it and it works 1,000 times better, and you get more out of people as opposed to just, putting them in the box, like you said.
And being the person that always gives the answers, that shouldn't always be you. That shouldn't be the leader who's getting questions from their team and is always giving the answers. Of course, it should also not be the leader, say it shouldn't be the person in power always saying, oh, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions, because that also doesn't work. It doesn't encourage your team to just give you early flags of things that might be wrong if they don't already have a solution. You don't want them to feel hesitant in flagging certain issues. But being that person that circulates, that makes sure that the onus of communication and finding the answers is equally distributed is so essential. And like you said, it can be in the little things. It can be in the ways that we communicate daily. And I remember one of the things that I always encourage clients to do is, when you have things like team meetings, rotate the onus of who's leading the team meeting. Because if it's always you, if it's always the senior most person leading every team meeting, then it just becomes another occasion where the leader is the one who goes through the agenda and checks in on the projects, and people contribute, but the balance of power is very clearly in favor of the leader all the time. And that's how the meeting always goes. But if it rotates and if different team members get a chance to lead the meeting, they're learning so much. They're learning how to lead a group of people early on, even if they're perhaps just a new hire. They're learning how to keep everyone on agenda. They're learning how to make sure everyone contributes just through the simple act of being able to lead a team meeting once a week.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. We've tried that actually too this year. We used to lead like the team meetings, me and my another manager, but then we said people are going to rotate, and I've also emphasized that I want you to start the meeting with something personal that you like, because I'm a really big proponent of that. And then I got to learn about different cultures. Like, had a team member from Colombia telling us about this crazy holiday where everybody dresses up and has a good time, and it just kind of, we got to know each other better, because again, we've been isolated for so long that we not having a chance to have those organic conversations in the office that are just like about life and kind of the things that we're interested in. So it really helped, and that's what we painted for the team too, is that this is a chance for you to like keep people engaged and to keep kind of get to know each other a little bit better. So it definitely was a much better unlock to do that, even though people are very resistant initially, because they're afraid and, but I'm like, well, if you're afraid, then we have to check our team vibe here, right? Because something is off if you're afraid of like speaking within the immediate team, people that you work with all day long, right? So, yeah, definitely a good idea to do the cycling.
Yeah. It's a very interesting point that you brought up, that some people feel hesitant, some people feel afraid. And you also brought up the fact that you have a multicultural team, and you have to kind of keep in mind the different mindsets that people are already coming in with. Tell me more about multicultural communication and how you've handled it, because you're of course also a really great example of someone with a rich multicultural background, and I'm sure you had to make adjustments and adapt to a new environment. So I'm sure that you'll say yes to this question, that communication and clear and concise communication plays a great part in multicultural teams. So I want to know a little bit more about how you navigated that space.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in Canada, at least, you are bound to be on a multicultural team. I think regardless, there's absolutely no way that you'd be working with people that are just Canadians. I would just, because the country's made up of immigrants. So I think what you start with is like, I'm generally a curious person, and you need to start with some questions. Um, do you have any special holidays that you celebrate? You know, where do they come to be? Why is it special to you? Because I think there is like this kind of judgment that like, oh, this holiday, people just like want an extra day off, but it might actually be something traditionally that they have done, that they have warm memories with. It might have this really deep meaning, so just asking people and kind of getting interested in it, and then also telling them what you know about it a little bit as well, just kind of gets them to open up a little bit more, especially if they're new and they're from a different country and they really don't know how to navigate. So you want people to keep their individuality. So if I know that somebody speaks Spanish, for example, I will use like hola and gracias, just to kind of, I know I would maybe butcher the spelling and the pronunciation, but just to kind of, show that I kind of remember this little unique piece about them. Or if it's their birthday, I will like make sure that it's written in their language. I think just kind of creates a feeling of, warmth, I would say, and kind of mutual interest. Because really, when you get to know a person, like you have to bring their um, background into it a little bit and just get interested. And you'd be surprised. People kind of go. They love talking about themselves, right? So they will go. Like you will learn so much, and it's like, wow, I feel like I've traveled somewhere. Like this is great. And you get good travel ideas, so it's just like a win-win, to be honest. So that's the way that I think about it.
That's a great touch, giving people a birthday card in their own language. I'm sure people appreciate that and they really feel seen. And that's what you're really trying to accomplish, right? Like, I see you. I'm not going to treat you as person X. I'm going to treat you as who you are and who you want to be and all the things that you're bringing with you. And that probably is one of the great things about Canada. I have never been, but I have spoken to enough Canadians by now to understand that you really take multiculturalism seriously. And that's incredible. And that's rare. There are countries that want you to fit in, that want you to just become part of the crowd and not really stand out too much. I would say probably the country that I'm from is pretty much like that, very homogenous. But countries where you really feel like you can be yourself and all the things that you lived through before you got there matter. You're not supposed to just erase everything from your history because how destabilizing is that?
Oh
So
yeah, yeah, for sure. You can't. Yeah, Canada is extremely accepting. I would say a little bit to a fault, maybe sometimes, because it doesn't ask anything in return except for you to be a decent person back. And then sometimes if your culture has a negative view on genders or people's sexual orientation, and you bring that here, that is a no-no because that kind of goes against what, at least in my mind, Canada stands for, right? So then people are like, well, you told me I could be myself, but so then you get into this really complicated kind of rabbit hole. But luckily, you don't face that at work too much, and I think you can also help break some biases that people may have in terms of, if in their country, I'll use gender as an example because I think that one is fairly widespread, unfortunately. If you're a woman from another country and you come here, you might have been used to be treated a little bit more in a negative light, but here you kind of are given this opportunity to kind of be yourself and speak your voice and kind of find your voice. And it will take you time to do that because you've been kind of kicked down and conditioned to kind of not say too much and kind of fit into a mold. And then if you have people that support that journey, I think that's just great because you're really helping the person become the best version of themselves. So you have to kind of be aware of these little things as well. But people won't necessarily tell you, and they won't even know it happened to them because it's just like Pavlov's dog. They've been conditioned, and until somebody new comes around and like kind of shows them a new way, then they realize like, oh man, something happened here, But that's like a really deep subject right there for sure.
I love that. Being conditioned to do something, to behave in a certain way to an extent where you don't even realize that this is not quote unquote normal. This is not conducive to my mental health. And I really like the link that you drew. Maybe it's a link that I drew between what you said about encouraging team members to start a team meeting with something personal. Sometimes it's being able to tell your own story that really empowers you, and that really shows you that you have something to say, you have something to contribute. It doesn't even matter if you're still very young. It doesn't matter if you're older, but you feel like you haven't accomplished much. It doesn't matter if you've come from somewhere else and your English isn't that great. Everyone has something unique to offer. And when you're encouraged to tell stories about your past, to tell stories about who you are, that's really legitimizing. It's really, it opens that door of, oh, wow, I have something to offer. I didn't think of it like that. And that's what you were talking about with that deconditioning that happens, that people understand that just because their stories might have been suppressed at some point, it doesn't mean that their stories aren't valuable, and that suppression that happened in the past was wrong. That's what needs to be corrected. So how do you empower people? How do you, as a leader, empower people to bring those stories to the forefront? And I love all the things that you've already talked about. Are there times where you've seen people struggling? Are there times where you've had to have difficult conversations with people? And did those always go smoothly?
No, it's something actually that's still very hard for me to do because I at least like to think I'm a pretty empathetic person, and I'm always trying to come from a place where I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but you will potentially make the damage worse if you don't confront it head on. So I think it's a pretty common thing with human beings in general. You think that issues will just resolve themselves, and that doesn't end up happening. So I had to talk to someone about their body odor, for example. And I was extremely uncomfortable because how do you approach this conversation from a um, like from a place of wanting to help as opposed to pointing something out? Because obviously, usually it's a surprise to the person, and you never want to surprise somebody like in that kind of conversation. And then you want to be careful because you don't want to like kind of start poking around about what's going on because like it's just a very sensitive conversation. So I actually went through a training before of how to have difficult conversations. So they would give you an example, and I thought, man, this is going to be like made up. This is going to be so easy. So there was an example of, oh, this person is not performing. They're taking too many breaks, and you don't see the other detail, and then the other person doesn't see your detail. And I'm, sitting there so confident. I'm like, well, why are you taking so many breaks? And then, a person hits me with, oh yeah, my wife has cancer and stuff. And it's just like, oh, and then you really don't know what to say. So the purpose of the extra is to make you like exposed to like people will say a wide variety of things, and you need to be ready for them. So I approached the odor conversation in particular as I kind of pointed out that there has been this problem that I've been noticing, and I just want to make sure that like you're aware of it. I'm trying to do it for you to help you, because if you're meeting with customers and clients, you want to make sure that this is not an issue. And I'm like, please don't think that I'm trying to like belittle you or anything like that. So you have to, for every one bad thing you say, you have to say 3 good things. So usually that's the ratio. And just constantly reiterate that you're doing this to help the person, not because you're this authority figure that just feels the need to point out other people's inadequacies to them, right? So that was really tough. And then becoming a manager at a young age, there's somebody that told me one time, I'm not going to listen to you because you're a kid. And I said, well, you don't necessarily have to listen to me, but we do have to work together. And you have to earn their trust to say, I'm not really here to tell you what to do. I'm here to find you a way to do things a little bit better, a little bit easier, and then we can both hopefully learn something. Because you have life experience, I have maybe a little more of a technical experience or understanding, and I also am not biased, and I don't have this baggage of like how things are supposed to work. So when you break it down for people that way, they're like, oh, okay, and then they are more on board with you. So yeah, definitely had my share of that.
I love all those examples. The way that you approach the odor conversation, it was with such kindness and such empathy and sympathy with that for that person. The fact that you made it about them succeeding and not them being a nuisance for everyone else is just such a great mindset shift. And the fact that you did take the time to have that conversation, even though you were very awkward with it and you had never had a
Oh yeah.
conversation like that in your life, it's really it speaks a lot to the way that you're thinking about the team. And I really love that idea of saying 3 positive things to 1 negative thing. And I would say that the 3 positive things should all be sincere and not just made up and not just fluff, because people see through that, especially when you're giving someone, critique, and you're critiquing their work. People know you're going to use the sandwich technique. People know, they're like, oh, okay, get on with it. Get on with it. I don't really want to hear the positive fluff that you're putting on. But if you're not putting on fluff, if you're saying, no, listen, I really want you to focus on this bit because I think this is your strength and I'm pointing it out because I think it's really great and you need to build on it, then they might listen and they would be like, okay, they're not just full of crap. They're not just saying all of this just so they can get to the point where they criticize my work.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah,
intention really comes through.
yeah, intention is super important, and even in performance reviews now, I let the person that I'm doing a performance review for speak first, and we start off kind of philosophical questions, a little bit like what was the best moment, what was the worst moment, what you would have differently if you had a time machine, and then we go into the areas of improvement. I don't like to call them disadvantages or anything like that because anything can be improved, especially your mindset, and then you build from that. And usually when you give people a chance to do that, you kind of have the same story, unless you're like really divergent. That means that there's a bigger issue at play. And I keep very detailed notes about people in terms of like what they do and like what I think would have been done better, so I can give specific examples and not just say, oh, you're great at analytics. I try to go into detail, like, oh, remember when we did this for this project? I really like the way you did that. And it's a lot of work, but like I sometimes in the middle of the meeting, I'm like, wait, I got to write this down so I don't forget, because I want to give like a comprehensive view. And I like to get all the areas of improvement stuff out of the way first, because again, that's kind of like the hump. And then you go into the good stuff. And that way people leave the meeting with, okay, I feel good about what's going on. Even if they have things to improve on, you really don't want to end the meeting with, well, I'm just doing a terrible job and it's just downhill from here, So it's, you really have to be, in my mind, as detailed and specific as possible when providing feedback to people.
Being detailed and being specific. You can't go wrong with those 2 things. I wanted to wrap up by talking a little bit more about you speaking outside of the company. Have you done a lot of that in terms of representing either yourself or the company outside of your own team or outside of the company? And what has been your experience like?
Yeah, I usually speak at university or school events, kind of advertising the different programs that we have at the company. So that was when I used to work at in the aerospace field at Unilever. Usually be like an alumni event or something like that, where I'm trying to get like other interns or students to join. And then if there's ever going to be any trade shows or expos in the future where there's other consumer goods companies or forecasting or something like that, then I definitely would probably go there and do some speaking a little bit.
Do you find that it's different when you're speaking outside of the company and representing the company? Do you find that you have to showcase a different side of Nikolai when you're addressing a crowd that is not familiar with you?
Yes, I think you have to be a little bit more formal in the beginning, but you have to balance that out with um, who you are. So I think it would depend on an event. So if it's an event with young people in school, I want to be as relatable as possible. So I'm not going to be hitting them with a ton of jargon and professional business because they already are intimidated as it is, and they don't like usually know what they want to do. So you want to be as personable as possible with them and speak kind of on their wavelength. If you're at an event where you're trying to network or showcase your knowledge, I would lean to more of the jargon and specific examples, and again try to tie that in with a little bit of humor as well, just to kind of land the point across. So not too much, but just enough to kind of get people interested in hearing what you have to say.
And I love that you do this exercise for yourself to really think about all the acronyms and all the jargon that you use in everyday life, because sometimes that becomes second nature, right? When I was at P&G, it was everything was an acronym. And you needed an entire dictionary in your head to always be translating the acronyms. And at one point you didn't need to anymore because they were just second nature. And the moment you stepped out of that little microcosm, you couldn't just switch off that part of your brain. And what you said makes so much sense, that anyone who is interested in speaking outside of their company has to do that exercise for themselves, where they think about all the different pieces of jargon that they use in their everyday language and translate it into simple terms. And that's really when they become effective and impactful as a speaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's also acronyms are funny because even in the same company, they can mean different things. So, a simple example, PO, right? To some people, it's purchase order. To some people, it's production order. And then if you're just using that and talking without context, you may get like a person doing a completely different task altogether. And it's just like being very clear, like we're just onboarding a new person now, and I like sent them a glossary of acronyms. And it doesn't help that we also did a huge organizational change where we changed the titles of what everybody's called now. And then people interchangeably are using like both, so they call my team bomb, but now we're MCP, but in all the slides it says bomb. So you're sitting there like trying to do a Sudoku puzzle of acronyms. It's quite challenging, I would imagine, for a new person, challenging for me, because I'm trying to be like, oh yeah, you're called this now. Sorry. Like, I'm trying to, so I'm purposely like, if we're in a meeting and chat, I'm like, this equals that, and people usually like and laugh at it, but I'm trying to even change how I talk, and it's so difficult because it's so ingrained. So, yeah.
And sometimes the acronym can be the same, but the connotations can be different. Saying that someone wants something ASAP can just mean wildly different things. It can mean that someone wants it in the next minute or someone wants it tomorrow. Or saying that I'm going to get this to you as soon as I can or as soon as possible. You can interpret that to mean that I will get it to you as and when I can get it to you as soon as my schedule frees up, or I'm going to drop everything and get this to you ASAP.
Do you know what EOD stands for?
End of day?
Yeah, so I've seen that used. I've seen the meme which kind of encapsulates what we're talking about here. It says EOD. Oh, I thought you meant end of December. Like my apologies, right? And I mean, like that's a good one to use, like the one time of the year to kind of like sometimes to ease some tension or something like that. But yeah, like I always thought the MVP also means one thing, but it also can mean another thing, and just there's so many. So I always ask what the acronym means if I don't know these days, even though people are kind of afraid to do that too sometimes because you appear that you don't know, but nobody knows. That's the real truth. That's the real truth.
The moment you realize that nobody else knows more than you, that's when you
Yeah,
become a true leader.
absolutely. That's what I would say.
Oh, it's been so much fun talking to you, Nikolai. Thank you so much for bringing in all those wonderful stories and examples from your life. And I'm sure that you are an asset to your team. Everything that you talk to me about, if you are even 80% or 70% of the awesome leader that you just talked about, I am sure that your team is really benefiting from your knowledge and your experience. And I'm sure you're 130%. I was like being mean a little bit there. I don't know why.
No, no, you're not being mean. You're being realistic because you have to talk about averages, right? So you're not going to be 100% some days. Some days you're going to be over, depending on how you feel. Yeah, I do want to say one thing. It was kind of a learning moment for me, and because I think this will encapsulate kind of our conversation nicely. When I was a student, the intern, they put me in the manufacturing floor to prep components that go into all the electronics. And I wanted to do a really good job, so I prepped a lot of them. Now, of course, you would think that they probably need to be at different length because you're building a wide variety of things, but nobody told me that. And I did anyway. I thought I did a good job. A couple of years passed, and I'm, giving somebody a hard time on the floor that works in manufacturing publicly, which you shouldn't do in the first place. But anyway, and then a supervisor took me aside and said, like when you were a student, you prepped all these parts, but I had to scrap them all, and they were like a year lead time. But we didn't tell you because, you're new and it was an honest mistake. So I'm like, maybe like what you're doing here, also the person, is maybe going through some stuff or, you're not seeing the full picture, maybe be a little mindful of that. And I think for me, that's just really something to always keep in mind of what someone else might be going through. And really, you might not be seeing the full picture. And then you might have had lots of problems that you've made that people never told you about because they've been looking out for you. So you're not the Teflon Don that you think you are. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that because that was kind of a wake-up call for me at that time.
That's an amazing example. I love that. How you might be propelled by so many different kindnesses that you didn't even realize you had along the way. And that's really the job of a true leader, to be so kind and to propel you forward, sometimes without even knowing, without even showing it, without even expressing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a humbling day.
And we all need that. We all
Yeah,
need that
absolutely.
once in a while. Thank you so much, Nikolai. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.